Are you going to say something to others? Well, we're figuring out the setup. If y'all have one of these little smart devices, pull it out. Turn it off. I mean, turn off the sound, but pull out the device, and I'll tell you what to look for.
Okay.
And if you don't have one, don't worry. I've got some old-fashioned printed material.
Hare Krishna. It's so nice to see so many smiling faces today. I know we have some new guests in the back. Can you tell me your name? Lennon? Emma? Emma or Emily? Emma. And who do you have with you? Archie. Hi, Archie.
Hey.
Well, welcome. How did you find out about it? Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Oh, well, I'm so glad that you're here. All right, very cool. And we have some other returning guests, and so I'm super excited about today. By Malati's request, we are going to sing My Sweet Lord by George, but is it by George Harrison? Yeah, by George Harrison.
So you can look up the lyrics on your device, and then I have 20 sheets here. So who don't have a device, you can share a sheet or.
So Malati Devi Dasi is a senior disciple of Srila Prabhupada. She was there with him when ISKCON was first being developed, and just really was there from the very beginning and served him personally. So we're so happy that she's here with us today. She traveled from New Vrindavan, and thank you, Marissa, for driving her. So I'm sure she'll be available for questions after this. If anyone would like to give a donation for transportation costs, we'll be taking that also. And so we'll go ahead and sing, and then after that, she'll talk for a little bit, and then we will have our vegetarian.
I'm going to need the mic. No, I'm just kidding.
How does it work? Just go this way.
You never need a mic.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, so for the newer people who might be wondering why we would be singing a George Harrison song, the little talk that I'm going to be giving today is about Srila Prabhupada, who was, where's the picture? Okay, he is the founder of the Hare Krishna movement. And it was through the efforts of 6 young couples, myself included in that group, and a baby, my daughter, who was 6 weeks old at the time. We went to the UK, and we had a mission, you could say. We had a strategic plan. The Hare Krishna movement was not yet well known. In fact, you could say we were largely unknown. And because we were having such a wonderful experience, we wanted more people to have that experience. And the experience was centered around the chanting that we've all just taken part in of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. There were no little devices. There was no internet. It was pretty basic stuff, dial-up phones. Some of you probably haven't even seen those things. And no credit cards. At least we didn't have any. But we were determined to expand this preaching, this chanting. And in our basic book, Bhagavad Gita, which is over here, you can, if you don't have one, pick one up, was explained that what the great person does, the common person will follow. If there's somebody you kind of idolize, you look up to, you want to be like them, or what is it they're doing? I'm going to do that too. And at this time in the world, this was 60s, actually, ending of 67. So many of you in this room have not yet taken birth. And who are the most influential persons at that time, it was the Beatles. So we thought, if we get those Beatles to chant Hare Krishna, the whole world will hear Hare Krishna, and everyone will start chanting.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
So what is the likelihood of 3 unknown American couples and a 6-week-old baby without any funds, without any introduction? What was the likelihood that we could actually meet the Beatles and get them to chant Hare Krishna? But we weren't thinking like that. We were thinking, we're going to do this. And so we left America on a very inexpensive flight. We didn't go straight to the UK. That cost too much. And besides, we didn't have the necessary funds to directly get into the UK. We borrowed $1,500 and we stopped in Hoek van Holland. And 2 by 2, we entered the country. Myself, my husband, and my baby went first. The Hoek van Holland, they have a ferry boat. Now there's the channel. You can go under the ocean. But at that time, took a ferry boat over. So we took the ferry boat over. We come to the customs, okay, and they were really worried about hippies invading England at the time. So you really had to prove your worth, We'd gone to the Goodwill Salvation Army and got some, proper looking American clothes. And I had gone to the English embassy and I got some brochures about all the castles in England. There's a lot. And so our turn in the line. So what are you doing? Why are you coming to England? I pulled out my brochures. We've come to visit all the castles in England. Do you have any money? We definitely do. How much? And I pulled out $1,500. At that time, that was a respectable amount. Okay, we were in. Next thing was we had to find a bank and send that money back to the people over there on the Holland side. And 2 more came in, got in, sent the money back. The last couple came in. And then we had to send the money back to the BBT, the Prabhupada's BBT, the publishing where all our books are done, very early stages. And the money got lost. So that was like, we're in, but we have this, pain in our heart. Prabhupada said, don't worry, it was a 5th-class bank. And eventually the money was found. So normally, before we give a little talk, we sing it's called bhajan, a devotional hymn called Jai Radha Madhava. So a number of you here already know that. But because I'm going to be speaking about George Harrison and Srila Prabhupada tonight, we're going to sing the most well-known, to the devotees anyway, of George's songs. And we'll try, we've got Marissa here. So maybe you can come over here so we don't have to drag the mic over. And we're going to try to sing this song. Anybody here not ever heard of My Sweet Lord? Okay. Oh, well, okay, a couple of you. You're going to hear it now. Just try to move it here a little bit. We can try to sing along. I've shortened, at the end, I've taken a few verses out just to move it along. But if you have the piece of paper, you'll see. And there's a part where it goes, my sweet Lord, and parentheses, hallelujah. So she'll do the my sweet Lord, and all of us will go, hallelujah. And then it changes up to Hare Krishna. Just follow along the best you can. And it's not on the level of the Vaishnav acharyas, in other words, the great sages and saints of the past who produce these bhajans or these songs. But Prabhupada, as you will learn, definitely appreciated George Harrison's endeavors to spread Krishna consciousness. And as I said, this one, My Sweet Lord, is one of the most well-known to almost everybody except this innocent couple here. But you'll learn it. And maybe somebody will say, "What'd you do yesterday?" And tomorrow they'll, "What'd you do yesterday? What'd you do this weekend?" "Oh, we went to the Hare Krishnas and we learned My Sweet Lord." Okay, so we don't have any backup guitar or harmonium unless somebody knows how to do it.
Dun, 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 dun,
So we'll just but here,
That's
because
better.
it starts, I'm cutting out some of the lyrics in there. Okay, so everybody ready for this experience? And after we chant My Sweet Lord, then we'll hear a little bit about Prabhupada and George and fame. Yeah, do remember I'm quite deaf, and so it's hard for me when there are too many sounds coming at me to know what people are saying. So Keelanand is an oldie but goodie, and he's going to try to provide some little backup sounds here. So,
Okay. My sweet Lord, my Lord, I really want to see you.
wait, let's start again.
I don't know what key you're gonna do.
Well,
I think she just better sing.
you can try it. Okay, so the chorus is the part she first sung. So first sing that chorus, so we know what it is.
My sweet Lord, my Lord, I really want to see you.
Okay, so we'll start now, and that was just to give them what the chorus part is, and verse 1, and let's go for it, and everybody can kind of, from your paper or your device, join in, okay?
I really want to see you. I really want to be with you. I really want to see you, Lord.
But it takes so long, my Lord, my sweet Lord, my Lord, my Lord. I really want to know you. I really want to go with you. I really want to show you, Lord, that it won't take long, my Lord. Hallelujah, my sweet Lord. Hallelujah.
I really want to
See you, really want to see you, really want to see you, Lord. But it takes so long, my Lord, my sweet Lord. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
I really want to know you.
Hallelujah.
I really want to go with you.
Hallelujah.
I really want to show you, Lord. That it won't take long.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Sweet Lord.
Hallelujah.
My Lord.
Hallelujah.
My Lord.
Hare Krishna.
My Lord.
Hare Krishna.
Sweet Lord.
Hare Krishna.
Oh,
Hare
I
Hare.
really want to see you.
Hare
I
Rama.
really want to be with you.
Hare Rama.
I really
We
want
want
to
to
see
see you, Lord,
you.
but it takes so long, my Lord. Hallelujah.
My Lord.
But we're not going to be cutting any records anytime soon. But yeah, George Harrison, he died. So,
Were you the backup singers on that?
no, we were the inspirational persons. So on a cold December night in New York City, can everybody hear all right? Yeah, okay. So on a cold December night in New York City, 1966. How many people here were already breathing on the planet in 1966? A few of you. Okay. So 1966, New York, December, an elderly Indian Swami climbed into a Volkswagen van. How many of you have any idea what it meant in the 60s to have a Volkswagen van? Yeah. Status symbol. And about 15 of his followers, so the elderly Swami goes into his Volkswagen. He has no clue anything about what a Volkswagen van could be. And 15 of his followers. Now, these Volkswagen vans weren't gigantic, but you could crush people in there. So 15 people, the elderly Swami, and their instruments, and a harmonium that was loaned by Allen Ginsberg. And they drove uptown to a recording studio near Times Square. Anybody here familiar with Times Square? You know, where the big ball comes down every year and they have riots sometimes? None of these people were professional musicians, but within a few hours, they had recorded an LP that even the producer was excited about. How many people here know what an LP is? Marissa, you don't know what an LP is? Okay, LP means long play, and it was a big vinyl, what we used to call a record. And it went on this machine that you put the, and there was a little hole in the center. So you put this thing on the record player, and there was an arm with a pin-like needle at the end. You put that down on the LP, long play vinyl, and it would start to go around, and voila, sound would come out. And there's actually a revival nowadays because the sound has been determined to be superior to our electronic sound stuff. So this LP, and then they had smaller ones, like if you make your big LP, and then you would have a few songs on each side, and then maybe one or two of those songs would be put onto what they called a 45. That was a smaller vinyl record with a bigger hole in the center. And those are usually the ones that shot up into the charts. So the producer was excited about this LP. It was a special album, more than just music. It was chanting and meditation. It was worship. And a few months later, a letter arrived at the small storefront temple in New York's Lower East Side. So this is still 66, little tiny place. This place here is probably a little larger than that little place was. But that was the first temple of the Hare Krishna movement. And somebody had heard the album and they told the Beatles about it. And they ordered 100 copies.
Wow.
This is from George. I get confused when I look around the world today and I see everybody running around and, as Bob Dylan said, anybody here know Bob Dylan? A few of you. He was a very eccentric, incredible, he's still breathing, just barely, but he is out there. But he was a poet, musician. He started out with folk music. That meant like an acoustic guitar, then moved into the rock and roll. But his lyrics were really incredible, I have to say.
Yeah.
He was on the pulse of things.
Yeah.
So George is quoting Bob. And Bob said, "He who's not busy being born is busy dying." Think of that. And yet nobody's trying to figure it out. What's the cause of death? And what happens when you die? I mean, to me, That's really the thing that's of any importance. The rest of it's secondary. So just to give you an idea of George's mindset. So George told Mukunda Goswami of his striking experiences that he had while chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. And he revealed some of his realizations about chanting and the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. The interview, so it's kind of like an interview, concludes with George telling how he feels about having helped the devotees expand the movement in England, how much he relishes prasadam. Anybody here have a good feeling about prasadam? Yeah. And how he deeply appreciates the movement's founder, Srila Prabhupada. He would later recall in November, wasn't it, in November of 1980, there was an interview about the impression, Swami Bhaktivedanta's album, this is the one, they ordered 100 copies, Krishna Consciousness, that was the name of the album. There wasn't, catchy little name, Krishna Consciousness, out front. And the impression that made upon them, and George says, I remember singing it, the Hare Krishna mantra, for days. John and I, with ukulele banjos, sailing through the Greek islands, Hare Krishna, like 6 hours we sang because you couldn't stop. Once you got going, you just couldn't stop. It was like as soon as you stopped, it was like the lights went out. In September of '69, Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, arrived at a house as a guest in Tittenhurst Park. Tittenhurst Park was a beautiful 80-acre British estate that John Lennon had just purchased. And we had a building, but the building wasn't ready for us to live. So basically we were kind of homeless, and John graciously opened up his doors to the group of us, which was expanding because we were going out on the street every day and people were just falling in line with us. By going out in the street means doing chanting Hare Krishna. So in September of '69, 3 or 4 times a week, the Swami, who had become known to the world as Srila Prabhupada, he gave public lectures in a tall, stately building at the northern end of the property. And that building had formerly been used for a hall for chamber music. So anybody here have any idea what chamber music is? Okay. Without hoping to offend anybody, it's quite boring. And there were these former stables on the property that had been turned into living quarters. So Prabhupada was living one, and all of us, we were in these little, now they're called a block of guest like houses, but they were like stables formerly. And Prabhupada met George and John during that together personally at that time at Tittenhurst. In 1969, in June, Prabhupada wrote a letter to Shamsundar, who was my husband, and he was the first person to actually connect with the Beatles and connect the Beatles with Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada wrote, I'm very glad to know that George is interested in recording some Krishna conscious album. It's very happy news. I request you, through you, your friends, George and John, to make a nice Hare Krishna record. I have all encouragement for you for this purpose. Try to make this Hare Krishna movement popular through any source possible. That's her business. In a purport from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is one of our foundational books of spiritual guidance, it says, influenced by the material consciousness of I and mine, he, means the soul, the living entity, begins to enjoy and suffer through his senses, and thus the living entity is entrapped in material existence. The living entity falsely claims things to be his. He thinks, I'm the king, I'm the monarch of all I survey. This is ignorance. Actually, nothing belongs to him. Even the body and senses do not belong to him. Means you, me, all of us. For they are given to him by the grace of the Lord to satisfy his different propensities through the material energy. But nothing actually belongs to the living entity. And then he becomes mad after everything, claiming, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. Vinasya maho yam maham mameti, from the fifth canto. This is called illusion. Nothing belongs to the living entity, but he claims everything is mine. So the last song ever recorded by the Beatles was called, anybody know? I, Me, Mine. And it's very clear where George took his inspiration. That song, all through, anybody, if you don't know, if you know it, you can sing, all through the day, I, me, mine, I, me, mine, I, me, mine. All through the night, I, me, mine, I, me, mine, I, me, mine. Prabhupada commented in a letter in 1970, I think George does not require to become my formal disciple because he's already more than my disciple. He has sympathy for the movement, and I have all blessings for him. Regarding how George may continue his meditation, that meditation may be done by keeping one picture of Krishna, keeping his mind concentrated on the picture of Krishna, and softly chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra for as long as he likes. Now, when we get initiated, we commit to 16, what we call rounds a day. He didn't say that, George, 16 rounds, he said, as long as he likes, because he already knew George liked to chant for a long time. So he said that will complete both his meditation and Krishna consciousness perfectly, according to the last verse of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which says, and of all the yogis, he always abides in me with great faith, worshiping me in transcendental loving service, is most intimately united with me in yoga, and is the highest of all. So it was, the first temple was in London, which we outgrew quite quickly. And one day George said, I think we need a bigger place. He used the word we, I think we need a bigger place. And long story short, in 1973, Bhaktivedanta Manor, formerly known as Pigot's Manor, was gifted to the Hare Krishna Society by George Harrison. And Prabhupada, when he arrived at the manor for the first time, Shamsundar was always like to do things a little spectacularly. So instead of having Prabhupada go through the London traffic, he hired a helicopter and brought him from Heathrow to the manor in a helicopter. Anyway, Prabhupada addressed the devotees, the crowd, given the facility of assembling in this nice house, this good boy, George Harrison, we must give him all glories. We must be thankful to him that he's given us a facility, and Krishna will bless him more and more. And then George came, and Prabhupada says, Hare Krishna, Jai. When I first entered this room, I said, oh, glories to George Harrison. Yes, you have given us this shelter, and Krishna will give you shelter at his lotus feet. We shall always pray like that. Just before Srila Prabhupada left this world in 1977 November, he removed the ring from his right hand, and he said to the disciples around him, this is for George, give it to him. Now, quite often you see Prabhupada with rings, or watches. It wasn't something he himself was hankering or desiring, but people would sometimes, after meeting him, just want to give him something, but there you are. They would take a ring off, they would take their watch off and just hand it to him. And to please him, he would put it on, he'd wear it for a while, and inevitably he would pass it on. He wasn't, attached like most of us would be. I received one such ring. He was very pleased with some DVDs I purchased at his request. Those DVDs are in Chicago, Kishore.
Wow.
He loved those DVDs so much, and we were in Bombay, and the DVDs, he said, put them in front, he wanted them right in front of his desk, which was just he would sit on the floor and have like a small coffee table, I guess you'd call it. Anyway, he said, hold out your hand. I didn't know what was happening. I held out my hand, the right one, of course. And he takes his ring off and he drops it in my hand and said, see if it fits. It fit the middle finger. Yeah, Prabhupada always showed his appreciation and his gratitude. He said, only an animal is ungrateful. As humans we have to. And not just, nowadays that word gratitude and grateful is tossed around like salt and pepper. But we really have to think, what am I grateful for? And express our gratitude in a way that is visible, not just, throw the word out of our mouth, but show our gratitude. So our position is that we're in this material world. George has sung, again, he's referencing, George has sung that I'm living in the material world. Yes, very sensible song. He's a good boy, realizing, yes. So in this material world, life is not good. Material life is not good in this sense because you have to change your body. Sometimes good birth, sometimes not good birth. Sometimes Englishman, sometimes cats, dogs, possibility. Because after birth, you'll get a body that was chosen not by you, but by the material nature. You'll create your body by your present activities, and nature simply awards you that body. So in that sense, we're all bodybuilding, right now. There was one teacher in the UK, his name was David Lawrence, and he was definitely interested in the philosophy and what we were doing. And he told about one time he found one of his students in the music room listening to the George Harrison record. It was, the music room was like a soundproof room. And so he's in there with the big speakers and he was reading the words, he was noting down. And David said, I was watching him. And then Prabhupada said, I'm in the material world? I knew right away what song. David said, yes, living in the material world, Prabhupada. That is a very nice song. There's more chairs here. Some more guests came, but there are more chairs. There's another chair up here. Please make yourself comfortable. So Prabhupada again said, that is a very nice song. So in brief, how many of you know this song, Living in the Material World? Okay, well, I'm living in the material world, living in the material world. Can't say what I'm doing here, but I hope to see things much clearer after living in the material world. While I'm living in the material world, not much giving in the material world. I've got a lot of work to do to try to get a message through and get back out of this material world. I hope to get out of this place by Lord Sri Krishna's grace. So, he was putting the philosophy right, you could say, full frontal, here it is. And then he just came right out by Lord Krishna's grace. So David said he was just there and he was praying and referring to the student. And when he came out of the room, I said, well, what were you doing there? And the student said, this record has been a complete experience for me. It's tremendous, really tremendous. So even ordinary people who had no interest in soul searching were being affected and touched by George presenting Krishna consciousness through his talent of music. So then Mukunda asked him, from the very start, you always felt comfortable around the devotees? Then George replied, the first time I met Shyam Sundar, I liked him. He was my pal. I knew that Shyam Sundar and all of you were in my age group. And the only difference really was you'd already joined and I hadn't. I was in a rock band. But I didn't have any fear because I'd seen dhotis, I'd seen your robes in the saffron color and shaved heads in India, because he had been formerly in India with the Maharishi. He says, so I'd seen, so I wasn't worried, you know. Krishna consciousness was especially good for me because I didn't get the feeling that I'd have to shave my head and move into the temple and do it full time. So it was a spiritual thing that just fit in with my lifestyle. I could still be a musician. I just had to change my consciousness. That's all. And then he's explained, actually, it gives me pleasure, the idea that I was fortunate enough to be able to help at that time. All those songs with spiritual themes, they were like little plugs. My Sweet Lord and the Others. And now I know that people are much more respectful and accepting when it comes to seeing the devotees in the streets and all that. It's no longer like something from left field. I've given a lot of Prabhupada's books to many people, and whether I hear from them or not, it doesn't matter. It's just good to know that they've gotten them. And if they read them, their life may be changed. So you can see George's mood. And this was being spoken like 1980. So that's like 13 years following, 13, 14 years following Prabhupada's passage. So Mukunda said, Srila Prabhupada always trained us to stick by our principles. He said the worst thing we could do would be to make some sort of compromise or dilute the philosophy for the sake of cheap popularity. Because many swamis, Indians, yogis had come to the West from India. But Srila Prabhupada was the only one with the purity and the devotion to establish India's ancient Krishna conscious philosophy around the world on its own terms, not watered down, but as it is. And George very enthusiastically said, that's right. He was a perfect example of what he preached. So Mukunda asked him, how did you feel about financing the first printing of the Krishna book and writing the introduction? So for those who don't know, there's a very famous book, part of our library of books. It's called the Krishna book. And it was ready to print, illustrated, beautiful colored illustrations, but we didn't have the money to print it. And Prabhupada suggested to Shamsundar, he asked George. And that was really controversial because we never asked George or anybody we met like that. We never asked them for anything. We would just give them Krishna consciousness, give them prasadam, give them kirtan, chant with them. But it was our regulator principle not to ask them for anything. And if they were inspired, which they generally were, they would offer. So Shamsundar was like, now George was thinking just like everybody else, because most people would come and try to get money out of them. So Prabhupada said, just blame it on me. Tell them this, tell them Swami's asking. And what happened was, there was a big dinner. Shamsundar was invited. And some very highly influential people in George's circle were at this dinner. And Shamsundar was still kind of intimidated to bring up the topic of asking for a substantial donation. In this case, about $20,000 was required. And it was getting toward the end of the dinner. The dessert had been served, and Shamsundar knew he was going to miss the golden opportunity if he put it off much longer. And George, Swamiji wanted me to ask you something. Oh, because he wants to know if you would publish, if you would, pay to print the Krishna book. And at least from how Shamsundar perceived it, he kind of like, made like a little bit of a face. And Shamsundar was thinking, oh, now he's just going to think we're like everybody else, And all at that same moment, things went really fast. Bang! A big thunder and lightning hit the building, and all the lights went out, and they're just sitting there in total darkness. And then all of a sudden, the lights came back on, And George has this big grin on his face and he goes, well, you can't argue with that. And next day he went to meet Srila Prabhupada, agreed to do that, and Prabhupada spontaneously, Prabhupada said, would you like to write something? Would you like to write an introduction? You know, I'll read a little of that at the end. So how did you feel about financing the first printing of the Krishna book and writing the introduction? And George said, I just felt it was part of my job, you know. Wherever I go in the world, when I see devotees, I always say Hare Krishna to them, and they're always pleased to see me. It's a nice relationship. Whether they really know me personally or not, they feel like they know me, and they do, really. So Mukunda said then, at lunch today, we spoke a little about prasadam. So how many people here know when we say prasadam? Or let's say how many don't know what we mean when we say prasadam? Okay, yeah, because you knew you wouldn't know. So prasadam it's spiritualized food. You'll be having some soon. In other words, it's food that's been cooked for the Lord and offered to Him. You know, so so at lunch we spoke about prasadam, vegetarian food specifically, that's been spiritualized by being offered to Krishna in the temple. So a lot of people have come to Krishna consciousness through prasadam, especially the Sunday feast. I mean, this is like all around the world, Sunday, Shankar said, you're going to go to any Krishna temple, there will be a feast. So this process is the only kind of yoga you can actually practice while eating. So George said, well, we should try to see God in everything. So it helps so much having the food to taste. Let's face it, if God is in everything, why shouldn't you taste Him when you eat? I think that prasadam is a very important thing. Krishna is God. So He's absolute. His name is form. Prasadam, it's all Him. They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Anybody heard that before? Yeah. So if you can get to a man's spirit soul by eating, and it works, why not do it? There's nothing better than having been chanting and dancing, or just sitting and talking philosophy, and then suddenly the devotees bring out the prasadam. It's a blessing from Krishna, and it's spiritually important, spiritually potent. It's a sacrament. The Christians talk about it as prasadam, instead of just being a wafer, like in the Christian church, they give you this wafer. It's a whole feast, really, and the taste is so nice. It's out of this world. It's undoubtedly done a great deal towards getting a lot more people involved in spiritual life. You know. So, and we're going to ask them. The Vedic, are mentioned, the Vedic literatures reveal that prasadam conveys a spiritual realization, just as chanting does. You make spiritual advancement just by eating it. And George replied, I'd say from my experience that it definitely works. I've always enjoyed prasadam much more when I'm at the temple. Prabhupada used to say when he was in Grihastha, he would go to particular temples to give a donation just to get the temple prasadam. So George is saying the same thing. And once I've actually been sitting with Prabhupada, and then somebody brought him prasadam to me. Sometimes you can sit there with prasadam, and then you find that 3 or 4 hours have gone by and you don't even know it. Prasadam really helped me a lot because you start to realize, now I'm tasting Krishna. Your consciousness suddenly of another aspect of God, understanding that He's in this little samosa. It's all a matter of tuning in to the spiritual, and prasadam is a very real part of it. And then Mukunda mentions, George, you and John met Srila Prabhupada together when he stayed at John's home in September '69. And George said, yes, this is very important here. Yes, but when I met him at first, I underestimated him. I didn't realize it then, but I see now, because of him, The mantra has spread so far in the last 16 years, more than it had in the last 5 centuries. Now that's pretty amazing because he was getting older and older, yet he was writing all of his books all of the time. I realized later on he was much more incredible than what you could see on the surface. We could ask, what about him stands out most in your mind? George replied, the thing that stays, that always stays, is his saying, I'm the servant of the servant of the servant. I like that. A lot of people say, I'm it, I'm the divine incarnation, I'm here, let me give you. You know what I mean? But Prabhupada was never like that. I like Prabhupada's humility, his humbleness, his simplicity. The servant of the servant of the servant is really what it is, you know? None of us are God, just his servants. He just made me feel so comfortable. I always felt very relaxed with him. I felt he was a good friend. And even though at the time he was 79 years old, working practically all through the night, day after day, with very little sleep, he still didn't come up like he was a highly educated intellectual being because he had this sort of childlike simplicity. It was fantastic. Even though he was the greatest Sanskrit scholar and saint, I appreciated the fact that he never made me feel uncomfortable. He always went out of the way to make me feel comfortable. I always thought of him as a lovely friend, really. And now, this is now like he's after his passing, and now he's still a lovely friend. So Mukunda said, in one of his books, Prabhupada said, your sincere service was better than some people who had delved more deeply into Krishna consciousness but could not maintain the level of commitment. How did you feel about this? And George said, very wonderful, really. I mean, it really gave me hope. Because as they say, even one moment in the company of a divine person, Krishna's pure devotee, can help a tremendous amount. If I didn't get feedback from Prabhupada on my songs about Krishna and the philosophy, I'd get it from the devotees, and that was all the encouragement I really needed. It just seemed that anything spiritual I did, either through the songs, helping publish the books, or whatever, really pleased him. The song I wrote, Living in the Material World, as I wrote, I Mean Mine, it was all influenced by Srila Prabhupada. He's the one who explained to me how we're not these physical bodies, we just happen to be in them. Srila Prabhupada was a perfect example of everything he preached. He already had an amazing effect on the world. There's no way of measuring it. One day I just realized, God, this man is amazing. He would sit up all night translating Sanskrit into English, putting it in glossaries to make sure everyone could understand, and yet he never came off as somebody above you. He had that childlike simplicity. And what is most amazing, he did all this translation in a relatively short amount of time, just a few years. And without having anything more than his own Krishna consciousness, he rounded up all these thousands of devotees. He set the whole movement in motion, which became something so strong that even after he left, it is still going on. It's still escalating even now at an incredible rate. And it will go on and on from the knowledge he gave. It can only grow and grow. The more people wake up spiritually, the more they'll begin to realize the depth of what Prabhupada was saying, how much he gave. So Mukunda asked, did you know that complete sets of Prabhupada's books are in the major colleges and universities in the world? Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Oxford, Cambridge, Sorbonne, and Prabhupada George goes, it should be. It should be there. His contribution has obviously been enormous from the literary point of view because he brought the Supreme Person, Krishna, into focus. A lot of writers, Bhagavad Gita, but only on the intellectual level. Even they write, Krishna said, they don't do it with bhakti or the required love. That's the secret, Krishna is actually a person who is the Lord and who will also appear here in that book when there is that love. We're going to mention the Vedic literature predicts that after the advent of Lord Chaitanya 500 years ago, there will be a golden age of 10,000 years when the chanting of the holy name of God will completely nullify the degradation of the modern age, and real spiritual peace will come to this planet. And George responded, well, Prabhupada's definitely affected the world in an absolute way. What he was giving us was the highest literature, the highest knowledge. I mean, there just isn't anything higher. Mukunda said a lot of people, when they get started in spiritual life, they worship God as an impersonal. So he asked George, what's the difference between worshiping Krishna or God in his personal form and worshiping his impersonal nature or his energy or his light? George said, it's like the difference between hanging out with a computer or hanging out with a person. Like I said earlier, if there is a God, I want to see him. Not only his energy or his life, I want to see him. And then Mukunda asked, well, what about trying to solve the problems of life without employing the spiritual process? And George responded, life is like a string with a lot of knots on it. These knots are the karma you're born with from all your past lives. And the objective of human life is to undo all these knots. And that's what the chanting and meditation on God consciousness could do. Otherwise, you're simply tying another 10 knots each time you try to undo one knot. That's how karma works. So Mukunda mentioned, I don't think it's possible to calculate just how many people were turned on to Krishna consciousness by your song, My Sweet Lord. Why did you feel you wanted to put Hare Krishna on the album at all? Wouldn't Hallelujah alone have been good enough? So just listen, George, was very, very actually intuitive and learned. So he replied, first of all, Hallelujah is a joyous expression that the Christians have. But Hare Krishna has a very mystical side to it. It's more than just glorifying God. It's asking to become his servant. And because of the way the mantra is put together with the mystical spiritual energy contained in those syllables, it's much closer to God than the way that Christianity currently seems to be represented here. So he explained my idea in My Sweet Lord, because it sounded like a pop song, was to sneak upon people a bit. The point was to have people not offended by putting in Hallelujah. And by the time it gets to Hare Krishna, they're already hooked, their foot's tapping, they're already singing along, Hallelujah. And then that kind of lulls them into a little security, and then suddenly it turns to Hare Krishna. And they'll be singing that before they know what happened, and they'll think, hey, that's kind of nice. And then George remembered the time that Mukunda remembers the time George came to Vrindavan, India, where Krishna appeared. And he said, you saw thousands of people chanting Hare Krishna. Did it strengthen your faith in the idea of chanting to see a whole city living Hare Krishna? George, yes. Yes, it fortifies you. It definitely helps. It's fantastic to be in a place where the whole town is doing it. And I also had the idea they were kind of knocked out about the idea of seeing these white people chanting on beads. Vrindavan is one of the holiest places in India. Everyone, everywhere chants Hare Krishna. It was my most fantastic experience. Then Mukunda said, you wrote in your book, this is like some heavy philosophy here. You wrote in your book, most of the world is fooling about, especially the people who think they control the world and the community. The presidents, the politicians, the military. They're all just jerking about, acting as if they're the Lord over their own domains. That's basically problem number one on the planet. So George said, that's right. Unless you're doing some kind of God-conscious thing and you know that he's the one who's really in charge, you're just building up a lot of karma and you're not really helping yourself or anyone else. There's a point in me where it's beyond sad seeing the state of the world today. Imagine if he was here now. This was 1980. Beyond sad seeing the state of the world. It's so screwed up. It's terrible, and it will be getting worse and worse. More concrete everywhere, more pollution, more radioactivity. There's no wilderness left, no pure air, chopping down the forest, and polluting all the oceans. In one sense, I'm pessimistic about the future of the planet. These big guys don't realize that for everything they do, there's a reaction. You have to pay. That's karma. And we're going to ask, do you think there's any hope? And George replied, yes. One by one, everyone's got to escape Maya. Everyone has to burn out his karma and escape reincarnation and all that. Stop thinking if Britain or America or Russia or the West or whatever becomes superior, then we'll have a rest and live happily ever after. That doesn't work. The best thing you can do is give God consciousness. Manifest your own divinity first. The truth is there. It's right within all of us. Understand who you are, what you are. If people would just wake up to what's real, there would be no misery in this world. And I guess chanting is a pretty good place to start. One could just say, thank you so much. And George said, all right, Hare Krishna. I'll just read a couple of things from the intro to the Krishna book. And
We don't have it here.
we don't have any here, okay, Amazon.com. Everyone is looking for, and he did this totally spontaneously, everyone is looking for Krishna. Some realize that they are, some don't realize that they are, but they are. Krishna is God, the source of all that exists, the cause of all that is, was, or ever will be. As God is unlimited, he has many names. Allah, Buddha, Jehovah, Rama, all are Krishna, all are one. God is not abstract. He is both the personal and he is both the impersonal and the personal aspects to his personality, which is supreme, eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge. As a single drop of water has the same qualities as an ocean of water, so has our consciousness the qualities of God consciousness. But through our identification and attachment with the material energy, the body, physical body, the senses, pleasures, material possessions, ego, etc., our true transcendental consciousness has been polluted like a dirty mirror. It is unable to reflect a pure image. And then if there's a God, I want to see him. It's pointless to believe in something without proof. And Krishna consciousness and meditation are methods where you can actually obtain God's perception. You can actually see God and hear him, play with him. It might sound crazy, but he is actually there, actually with you. Swami Bhaktivedanta is, as his title says, a bhakti yogi following the path of devotion by serving God through every thought, word, and deed. And by chanting his holy name, the devotee quickly develops God consciousness by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And then he wrote, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I request you, take advantage of this book, Krishna, and enter into its understanding. And I also request you make an appointment to meet God now through the self-liberating process of yoga union and give peace a chance. All you need is love. Krishna, Haribol, George Harrison, 31st of March, 1970. So I hope that not only did you have a little more insight into Srila Prabhupada, but also Prabhupada would say, Shriman George Harris,
Jai.
Bhakta George.
Jai.
Because he really helped put forward this movement. And the fact was, without that, there would still be people waiting to hear the Hare Krishna mantra. But when we first met George right away, he got the idea, let's make an album, let's make a record. And a week later, we're in this recording studio, and the Radha Krishna Temple album was recorded, and then a small, like I mentioned, the 45, the smaller cut of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra was made. And that record, because it was produced by George Harrison, was really pushed forwards. And we were in the top of the pops. It means everything has a rating, so we were like right up there.
Yeah.
And number 3 in Europe. So we were being sent around all over the place just to chant Hare Krishna. And because people thought we were like a rock group, because, I was being pushed by the Beatles. Then we'd show up in our dhotis, our saris, I had a baby under my arm, We'd pull out incense and flowers and ask people to chant, and they did. So it was a wonderful beginning of a great adventure. And thank you all for being here today and listening. And I hope that you also feel some new enthusiasm about chanting Hare Krishna. I'm probably way over time. I don't even know what time.
That's right.
Is it?
Right on the minute.
Wow, that's a miracle. You just see how perfect Krishna is. If there's any quick questions, I'll try to answer. Otherwise, we can move on to the next segment.
I just would like to say that personally, George Harrison definitely brought me to the movement, along with all of you.
Testimony, here's Akilananda Prabhu, George Harrison brought him to this movement.
And my dream came true out in Los Angeles at our art studio, where he came with Mukunda Maharaj. He came and there was a number of us art studio devotees. And
Krishna art.
Krishna art is putting together a museum, which is now
You can pass it.
in Detroit.
You can pass this. It's not great, but you can see. And the first picture on there was.
Yeah. He came through Mukunda Maharaj, and I thought, I want to give him something because I owe him so much. And so I quickly cast a Radha Krishna bas relief. It was about this big, a Radha Krishna like this, about this thick, and I put a patina on it and brushed it off. So when he came to my part of the studio, the mold shop, I gave it to him, and I'm very thankful. And so that was all. But I'm just so thankful to get to do that. Thank you. You were living history to tell us all about this. Thank you.
Actually, on his departure, he requested Shamsundar and Mukunda to come. He wasn't there at the moment of departure, but Shamsundar just arrived in India, and he got the message. So I zipped over to Radhakund and got a Harinam Chatter and some, Radhakund Tilak for him to take, and Radhakund water. And they met and were able to give them. And the devotees had brought large forms of Radha and Krishna that were in the room when he departed.
No.
Hare Krishna, thank all of you very much.
Malati and Hare Krishna. What did you do with the ring?
Oh, sad story. I was in New York City. The apartment was broken into, and it was in a little jewelry box, which was stolen.
Must have been Krishna. Take it back.
No, it was my sinful activities and bad karma.
Oh.
There you go. Perfect answer. Now we know. After the things, you know, get that.